So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure and privilege to be here every week with Diana and Gary and each and every one of you. We love what we do on the Saturday morning calls and the training program. It's something that's been going for, I don't know, 17, 18 years, and it's been a pleasure to be a part of, and it's always inspiring. Now, today we're very privileged because Mandakini is usually busy on a Saturday morning. So she's got a bit of a gap right now and made herself immediately available, for which we're very grateful. Thank you, Mandakini. And we'll just give you a bit about Mandakini's background. She's a wellness consultant with over 30 years of experience in assisting and guiding people from all walks of life in their journey to better health, utilizing food as medicine, real food supplementation, yoga therapy. And in addition to her BSc, she also holds a diploma in Oriental medicine and Japanese yoga. She has taught and lectured in Australia and countries throughout the world, including Israel, New Zealand, Singapore, UK, and the US. In addition to her clients worldwide with the Manatech products, Mandakini runs a wellness reset program and offers regular yoga classes. She has a passion to educate people about health and wellness. She loves seeing people's lives transform. And today, I know I'm 100% confident you're just going to love her unique and passionate perspective on keeping our hormonal system healthy. And I know, she's one of my go-to people for questions. There's a few of us that go, if we have questions we don't know, she walks her talk and she knows her stuff. So Mandakini, thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you so very much for your kind introduction. And before we get started, I just want to thank you, Diana and Gary, for keeping these calls going throughout the years and your dedication and always being here no matter what happens with your floods, with your fires, with your kids, with your families. You're always here. And if we can contribute in a small way, I'm just happy to contribute to what you're doing. So very, very grateful to you holding this space for all these years. It's amazing.
Thank you, Mandakini.
I'm sure I speak for every person on this call with our love and appreciation for what you do. Okay, guys, welcome to our hormone health and nutrition talk. I'm very excited to share this information. When I first joined Manatech nearly 19 years ago, I've always noticed that women are always really interested in their hormone health. And over time, I got educated, researched, helped people, and learned, obviously, the first thing that I got to learn is that hormones, both men and women have hormones. And the other thing I got to learn is that hormones are not just about procreation. Because normally I speak to people, and the first thing, if I mention the word hormones, women in particular will say, oh, I'm past that stage, or I don't need it. And that's why I think this talk is so important, to educate us about how important hormones actually are in our body, and that they actually govern our life in so many ways. So why would you want to learn about hormones? Maybe you want more energy. Maybe you want more clarity of mind. Maybe you're looking to lose some weight, to stabilize your blood sugar levels, you're interested in bone density as we age to keep it going. Maybe you're interested in controlling your food cravings, or you're interested in better glowing skin, or improving your memory, or just having emotional well-being, or being a bit more peaceful and more relaxed with people and less grumpy and less emotional. All of these things and more have to do with the hormonal system. So our hormones govern our life. They actually control our life in quite a major way. So understanding how they work and how we can assist them to work in a better way is crucial, really. So here are some functions that you may have not known that they are governed by your hormones. So our happiness, our hunger, our metabolism, our mental alertness, how we metabolize fat, our sleep. So just the instruction to go at night for our head to be put on the pillow and go unconscious, that's a hormonal instruction. Our endurance, our mood, our sex drive, our temperature regulation. Ladies, when we get to menopause, suddenly we realize temperature regulation, how important that is, and our ability to deal with stress. So our endocrine system, we're just going to keep it simple for this talk, just to have a concept, because the hormone topic is quite wide. There is a lot to be said for it, but we're just going to keep it simple. So as I mentioned, both men and women have hormones, and we're looking here at the basic few glands in this endocrine system. And you see that most of them, except for the ovaries and the testicles, men and women have the same. Pancreas is a hormone. Our adrenal glands that sit on top of our kidneys are in charge of so many functions, are part of the hormonal system. Our thyroid, you hear a lot of people complaining, especially women, complaining about thyroid function, and then they get put on medication for the rest of their life to govern the thyroid. Our pituitary gland, all of those are part of the hormonal system. Now, because there's a lot to it, I like to think of the hormonal system, if you can think about it as, it's like this simple system, really. If you can think of, it's true for our bodies, it's true for every thing that functions, and we can look at the hormonal system in that way as well. So if you think about it like a factory, right? We have input, we have what goes into the factory, we have the basic ingredients or materials, the raw ingredients that go into the hormonal system, into that factory. Then we have the aspect of the function of that system. So how well our hormonal system is functioning. And then we have the output. And to get a well-functioning system, we really want all these three aspects to be working well. So we're going to go through these three, but I just wanted you to have the simple concept, because once you understand this concept, we're going to make it a little bit, we're going to go into a little bit more detail, but just go back to this concept, because this concept of impacting the input, impacting the function, and impacting the output will give you already lots of tools to deal with your hormonal health. So now into that simple frame, we're just going to add a little bit more detail. And don't worry if you don't remember everything that is in this slide, doesn't matter, it's fine, because just remember that simple input, function, and output. So talking about input, some of the two main ingredients that go into this input, and maybe the top ingredient, is a group of nutrients that we call phytosterols, which are really plant hormones. They're not like our hormones, they come from plants. And in food, they will be in lots of healthy foods, in sweet potato, in grains, in legumes, things like soy. We can have a discussion about it later. So there's lots of sources in nature that have phytosterols. And phytosterols with good health, with good fats, together, they help the body make its hormones. So the first hormone that gets made is pregnenolone, which is like the mother hormone. It's like, if you like baking, guys, you can raise hands. Who likes baking here? If you like baking, so you may have, say, dough. And then from dough, you can make lots of things, right? You can make muffins, you can make bread, you can make biscuits. So sure, they're not exactly the same dough, but you get the idea. So once the body has that basic pregnenolone mother hormone, it can split and it can make any hormones that it needs for the day, because we, depending on our lifestyle and depending on our needs and depending on our health, we're going to need different levels of hormones every single day. So, and every time, different times of the day. Now, this major pregnenolone, this major hormone, the mother hormone, gets made in our sleep. So in our REM stage of our sleep, when we sleep in the morning, that's why most of us, if we slept well, we feel refreshed in the morning, because we have topped up our reservoir of hormones. And then we can start the day fresh and start allocating, the systems can start allocating what we need, our hormones, how much we need and of what. So there's two major pathways which we're going to talk about. It goes down one major pathway, which is the DHEA pathway, and the other one, the progesterone pathway. Now, the thing is that there's about 87 major hormones. And if I would love for you to remember something of this talk, which will be very helpful, is that our hormones, our bodies are able to produce one hormone from another. I remember when I first started being interested in the topic of hormones, I just heard all these terms, progesterone, estrogen. They were all kind of terms just floating in the ether. I wasn't sure how they were connected to each other. So this hopefully talk will give you that ability to start grasping how they are connected to each other. So, you know, with sleep, sleep can be a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle, because if you sleep well, you can make good levels of hormones. So then in the morning you can wake up fresh and have enough hormones for the cycle. But if you don't sleep well, if your hormonal system is deprived somehow, depleted in some way, you have trouble sleeping, you're not able to make the hormones for the next day. You wake up tired, and we're in this vicious circle. So getting our sleep under control is one of the first really important stages to just control our hormone and get it functioning better. So let's look at these two pathways. Actually, just before we go the different pathways, I love this analogy of a budget. So whether you follow a budget or not, I'm sure you understand the concept of budget. With a budget, we have income. And then we allocate the income to all the different things we need, whether it's food, whether it's rent or mortgage, whether it's cars, whether it's fun, whether it's travel. We haven't been doing much of that, right? But whatever it is, we allocate our resources. Now, if the income has not changed and you still have your same salary, your same income, but suddenly you have a very big expense, let's say your car, your gearbox breaks down and you have to fix that, or something with the engine, which we all know are a really big expense, how are you going to manage that expense? You have to get that car fixed. So now you're going to take all of your resources, as much as you need, and put it towards the car, right? But what does that mean? Now, if the income hasn't changed, now we have to make compromises, right? We're definitely not going to go to the movies. We may need to cut down on travel. We may need to cut down on some foods that are luxury foods. We may need to cut down and just keep to the bare essential until we can catch up on that gap. So I'm hopeful that this, and if you think of this analogy, this is a perfect analogy for the hormonal system. So I actually am going to take you back one step. So when we look, remember our first graph, our first model of input, function, and output. So if the input doesn't change, but we have a lot of expenses, a lot of areas that the hormonal system wants to divert energy to, if this doesn't change and this now grows, the hormonal system is going to run on a compromised way until we're able to get additional resources or until that big demand subsides. Why is that important? We've talked about the two pathways, the DHEA and the progesterone. So let's just for a moment look at the DHEA and then we'll tie it all together. DHEA has been called lovingly the fountain of youth. That's the hormone that is in our body in very high amounts. We peak around our 20s. It's been put in our bodies so we can make babies. And as we grow older, those levels decline. If you can see, women, by the time we're in our 50s, we're about 50% of what we had in our youth. Men decline a little bit faster. Generally speaking, one of the reasons that, as a generalization, men tend to live less than women is because there are lower levels of DHEA. Now that DHEA, if you remember the previous chart, DHEA is one of those pathways, but out of DHEA, there's another 50 hormones that get produced. They're very, very important. They're tests for our biological age, and they're really important for brain function. Now, you may know people as they grow older, they start complaining about memory, lack of mental clarity, those kind of complaints, and they have to do with brain function. In fact, when they've tested, when they've looked at Alzheimer's patients, they looked at their DHEA levels and compared it to their peer group that were well, and they found that people with memory and issues and Alzheimer's group had about 50% the levels of DHEA of their peer group that were not suffering these symptoms. So that's just to indicate how much DHEA our brain actually needs, between 5 to 6 times the DHEA level of the rest of the body. Now, DHEA levels is something that we can have tested just by a blood test. A simple blood test will check our levels of DHEA, and it's a very good indication to see where our health is at, because often if health deteriorates in the body, one of the things that will show early in the piece is actually declining levels of DHEA. Now, if you remember, we had the input, we had the phytosterols with the good fats at the top of the system, then we had the system, and then we had where the resources are going. Now, remember our budget. Suddenly we had to spend a lot of money on the car. So let me give you an example, where do we spend our money in our body? Okay, so we spend our money on function, right? All our systems that need hormonal function. We talked about memory, we talked about mental clarity, we talked about sleep, we talked about energy, metabolism. These are all uses that we need. But there's some things that may have to do with lifestyle and diet that could deplete our hormonal system unnecessarily. So things like stress, things like high glycemic foods and foods that are loaded with simple sugars, alcohol, coffee, sometimes even over-exercising, and there's some chemicals that can be also disruptors. So what does that mean? And I know that when I go through this slide, I'm probably not the most popular person in the room, because I'm going to give you an example, say, about chocolate cake, right? Who loves chocolate cake? I know I do love chocolate cake, anything with chocolate, in fact, especially the nice dark 70% plus, right? But the thing is, with, say, the sugar, when we consume sugar, anytime we consume more than 5 grams in a meal, the pancreas has to excrete a lot of insulin to deal with metabolizing that sugar, because it's too much for the body. The body kind of go, oh my God, what am I going to do with all this sugar? I don't have need for all this sugar. Let's just see how we deal with the situation. And part of the dealing with the situation is excreting all this insulin so the body can metabolize it, maybe shove some of it in the liver, just so the body can go back to functioning. Now, if you remember our chart, remember input, function, and output. Insulin is part of the output. It's part of the hormonal system. So remember when we spend too much money, suddenly we had to repair the car. That's what the body has to deal with when we give it too much sugar. So now all the resources, until the body has gotten back to a status quo where it can function and that extra sugar is not a threat, it has to give all its resources now to metabolizing the sugar. So what happens? Remember, we're not going to spend enough money on the other things. So now the body is going to prioritize, okay, I don't have that many reserves. I don't have that much pregnenolone after I spend so much on the insulin. Let me just see what I can do. Where can I save? Maybe, bones, we can do with a little bit less bone cells. Maybe it's not such a priority. Let's just keep the other organs, vital organs, functioning. So I know I'm making a bit light of it, but hopefully that gives you the idea of how we can impact the system by reducing unnecessary expenses. So when we're able to reduce stress, when we're able to have low glycemic foods, when we're able to control that unnecessary expenses, we're already winning, because now we're not going to spend, now we can spend our resources that we have in a good way. So just going back to a couple of those slides here, you know, these phytosterols and the cholesterol, they're the two major ingredients, major building blocks for this hormonal system. Now, there's a few other ingredients that go in the mix. We have vitamins and minerals, and we're going to talk a few other ingredients, but these are two very important main ingredients to help the body make the hormones that it needs. So turns out that in our modern diet, like, so there are cultures, there's cultures that have very, very good hormonal health. Some cultures that don't even have a word for menopause in their vocabulary. They're just known for their good longevity and good health. And when these cultures have been studied, they have found that, amongst other things, they have very high levels of those phytosterols in their diet. Now, in our modern diet, with everything that we have done, with the food that got depleted, with the extra stress, with the toxins that are in our environment, with everything that we have put, with the processing of the foods, with the choices of foods that we make, all of that has contributed that on average, which is quite a shocking, really, number, in a modern diet, we're getting on average 1 to 3 milligrams. Now, that's about 2% of what we need. And when you're thinking about it being one of the major ingredients that are in charge of our hormones, that are going to function our thyroid, that are going to help our pancreas work better, that is going to keep our mental activity, that is going to keep us alert, that is going to keep us relaxed and not stressed, that's not a lot of resources, right? So when we look at that, there is an issue really with the income of those phytosterols. I've just jumped on the slide, but I will go back to it. Just a little bit, men, I'll get to you, a little bit for the women, but I'll get to you, and men, it's good for you to understand, because most men will have women in their lives. So for women, whether you're young and dealing with menstrual issues, or whether you've gone through menopause or perimenopause and you're starting to deal with menopause issues, one of the important factors, whether we're going to be angels or monsters, meaning whether we're going to suffer from symptoms or we're going to go through it with ease, is the balance between estrogen and progesterone. While we're ovulating, we make our estrogen and progesterone in the egg follicles. They're produced in our ovaries. When we run out of eggs and we go to the next stage, we have to find a backup system to get these hormones produced, because they're not a luxury, they're a necessity. We actually need them. So when we're looking at the backup system for progesterone, just have a look with me for a moment on this chart. Follow my arrow for a moment. Hopefully you can see my arrow. Remember how we talked about pregnenolone going down the two major pathways, the DHEA and the pregnenolone. Now just hang on with me, just have a look at this line here for a moment and see what happens to women when they go into menopause. Up. What does that mean? I know it's just one squiggly line, and our lives pretty much are never going to be the same after one line has moved. Okay, so what does that mean? If you see, now it means that, remember at the beginning of the talk, I mentioned that our body is able to create one hormone from another. So when this pathway of the pregnenolone down to progesterone doesn't work very well, because we're not able to produce the progesterone in our egg follicles like we did when we were menstruating, the backup system says, okay, we can make it from DHEA, no problem at all. Well, theoretically no problem at all. But if you remember, when we looked at the DHEA slide, the DHEA, we were already struggling, right? Our DHEA levels were depleting. We were getting 2%. We were already struggling at DHEA. So now think of an admin person. Think of an admin person sitting at their desk with all these files, barely managing to deal with all that workload that they have, right? That's the DHEA trying to do its job just on this side of the coin. And then when we go into menopause, say, okay, here's another 20 folders for you to deal with, just lumping it on their desk. And the admin person just did, I give up, forget it. I was barely doing my job with all these 50. You put another 20, I don't know how I'm going to function. And that's what happens. That's why all hell breaks loose for women going through menopause, because suddenly there is more compromise, right? The little bit of resources that we have, we were struggling to spread them. Now we have to spread them even more. And a lot of functions get compromised, and especially on the progesterone side. So hormones that are in charge of our cortisol, our natural anti-inflammatory, in charge of blood pressure, blood sugar levels. So that's a lot of pressure. And another area that we don't normally think about in the context of hormones, and I think that's one of the really important things to learn in this talk, is that hormones are in charge of bone density. So what does that mean? You would agree with me that all of our body is made out of cells, especially those of you that we've been talking about cells a lot. Our whole body is made out of cells. However, it turns out that our bones are made out of cells as well. And like every cell, they have a lifespan. And that lifespan means that a cell gets born and then a cell has to die and get replaced. Lo and behold, turns out that there's two hormones that are very important to this cycle when you talk about bone cells. The first one is estrogen, and estrogen is in charge of maintenance. When a cell has to go, it will help it move on. Progesterone helps build new bone cells. So remember, progesterone, we're having difficulty because the backup system goes to DHEA. Estrogen's backup system is the fatty deposits under the skin. So often we're in this situation that we have more estrogen than progesterone. So what that means for the bone cells, it means that the maintenance guy is doing much more removing than the creator guy, the progesterone, making new bone cells, which could lead to thinning of the bones and thinning of the walls of the bones, which we'll have a slide in a moment. I'll show you a slide. Just before we go there, I just wanted a slide for the guys and for the men in our lives. The prostate is part of the hormonal system too. It's a gland. Anything that has to do with glands is part of the hormonal system. And it turns out that a lot of guys are suffering from enlarged prostate. It starts already at 30. Some men, 30% of 30-year-old men are suffering from enlarged prostate, and it goes up to almost 100% in 80-year-old. What that means, so if you've noticed that your guy wants to urinate frequently, or they go and it never ends, they have to go again and again and again because it's not all, can't empty it properly, or waking up in the middle of the night to pee when they never used to do that. So all of those things is part of the enlarged prostate, which is basically putting a lot of pressure on the urethra, which is supposed to allow the urine to go out. And then that's the difficulty of urinating. Unfortunately, if an enlarged prostate stays there for a long time, it could turn cancerous. And prostate cancer is one of the top cancers in Australia. So along with breast cancer, which is also a hormonal driven cancer, Now, the good news is that there's been lots of studies that show that more than 75% of prostate cancer could be prevented by dietary and lifestyle changes, which I think it's a fantastic news. So back to our bones that we mentioned before. If you look on the left, we have a healthy bone. That means that the bones, the cells are tight. There's many of them. The walls are thick. So that means that they're strong. If we hit something or if we fall, it's fine. We're not likely to break it. But an osteoporotic bone, if you look at it, it has all these holes. Can you see all these holes? And the walls are really thin. So now it's really brittle. So that means that if we fall, so if you look at older people when they fall, or especially older women when they fall or break their hip, the recovery is very difficult, very difficult, because it takes so long to build these bone cells and we don't have all the resources that we need. So bone health has a lot to do, bone density, bone health has a lot to do with our hormone health and keeping the hormone functioning well. Now, when women come to menopause, often there's a fork in the road or a decision to be made, whether they're gonna, if they're suffering. Those that are not suffering, fantastic. But it turns out that 85% of Western women suffer from menopause symptoms at varying degrees. And one of the options to deal with it is HRT, hormonal replacement therapy. Now, for decades, there's been a lot of controversy around hormonal replacement therapy. On one side, the providers say that the risks are small. If a woman would go to her gynecologist to get HRT, you will be shown a little chart that shows you how much level of risk you have, that the risk of cancer is very low. And so basically trying to convince you that there is very low risk associated with hormonal replacement therapy to counteract a lot of other study that has shown that the risk may outweigh the benefit. So really the message of this slide from my point of view is just do your research when you are faced with a situation, because none of us are here to tell you what to do, just to point you to the fact that there's two sides to the story and you have to do your research and make your own conclusion in terms of which road you want to go down. Back to the hormonal system though, because this is the main topic for today. Remember our original slide where we had the arrows going into the factory, and then the factory, we had arrows coming out of the factory. Hopefully by now, you can see that the arrows that were going in, we had the phytosterols and the good healthy fats going into the system. Then we had the function of the system, right? Where are these resources going to go and how well can the system manage that resource allocation? And then we have the output that is essential and the output that maybe is not essential and we can control with lifestyle and food choices and so on. So now we just were really clear. One of the big messages is that when we have a lot of expenses, if our income doesn't change, it's very hard to manage. And we've already concluded that in our modern Western diet, there is very few of these phytosterols left in our normal diet. So that means that we're running on empty and our hormonal system has to keep making those compromises. So one of the tips was already to save with your unnecessary expenses, right? Reduce high glycemic foods, reduce stress if you can, reduce coffee if you can. I know you don't want to hear that, but any of those things will help because it will mean that we don't spend so much. But let's look at how we can earn more phytosterols. How can we put more phytosterols into the system? So we can increase the natural sources, foods. As I mentioned, they come in nuts, in seeds, legumes. Soy, I mentioned soy. There's a lot of controversy around soy today. There's the pro and the anti, but I'll give you one data around soy. There's been lots of study around menopause with Eastern women. So there was a study between Japanese women and American women, and they found around menopause symptoms. And the study found, there were several studies, but they always found that Asian women, Japanese women are 7 times less likely to suffer from menopause symptoms. And they've put it a lot to diet and lifestyle. And if you know anything about Eastern diet, it's very high in soy, it's very high in seaweeds, it's very high in all those foods that are rich in phytosterols. So that's just one aspect to point. However, having been around the block for, it's very hard as much as you want, and it's not an either or. By all means, definitely make the effort to increase your sources of healthy nutrients that are high in phytosterols. And we can look at supplementing, because when you supplement, you have a certainty. Because when you make food choices, you don't always know, even if you eat the right food that is supposed to be high in a certain nutrient, you don't really know. There's a lot of evidence now about declining levels of nutrients across the board. So definitely also in the area of the phytosterols. So if we're looking at supplementing, we're stacking the deck in our favor. We know. So what does that mean, stacking the deck in our favor? It means that we have that certainty and that ease and the convenience that you can take the supplement and you know that you're getting the levels that you need. So obviously there's lots of supplements out there, and obviously we are biased because we have been exposed to the benefits of what we have to offer. So the first supplements, supplement that Mannatech has to offer when we talk about hormonal system is Plus, right? Thank you, Plus. Thank you, Mannatech, for giving Plus in our life. Because remember that green square at the top of the cascade, those phytosterols. Plus primarily is an excellent source of phytosterols. So that means that we can elevate those low numbers, the 1 to 3 milligrams that we get on average as a modern diet, we can increase it by introducing the Plus. Now, one thing is really important when we look at the claims of Plus. Well, when we look at the claims of Plus, it says that it helps menstrual pain, spasm, cramps. It helps with, as a hormone modulator, our well-being, all of this. Now, one thing that I wanted to hopefully share is, remember our cascade. None of the supplements that we offer are a medicine for anything. I know that when I work with my clients, when they refer to it as medicine, I always immediately have to correct them. It's like a knee-jerk reaction. They say medicine and I turn it straight away into supplement, nutrient. Because if you look, remember all the areas that we mentioned at the beginning that the hormonal system is in charge of: mental well-being, metabolism, emotional well-being, mental alertness. We talked about bone density. So all of those, sleep, all of those, think of it, they're functions of the hormonal system. So when we take our supplements, we don't go and do anything with sleep. It's not as if we have a supplement that we take that is going to help sleep, or another supplement that we're going to take that is going to help our bones, or another supplement that is going to help our mood. Once you understand the functions that the hormonal system is in charge of, and that one of the issues is that there is the depletion, we're not getting enough input, just think of the fact that we're putting more input and now there's more to work with. It's like we've increased our income and now we can spend more. There is more to go around. So that's important to understand, because none of our supplements are specific to anything. They nourish the system. They are foundation of the system. Now, a very important partner of the plus is omega-3. And just a quick word about omega. Omega is, if you remember, in our cascade, we had the phytosterols and then we had essential fats. And together they make the raw ingredients to help the body create hormones. Just briefly, there is lots of sources of omega-3. Some of them, one distinction first is a distinction of comes from animal or comes from plant. For those that are vegetarian or vegan and definitely need the plant source, that's absolutely fine. It's just a little bit less efficient because the body still has to do a few metabolic transitions to get it to the form that our body actually needs. So if you're okay with having fish, then go for the fish because it's more effective. One from my point, I would probably, since learning that krill is the food of our whales, I always recommend to stay away from krill. It's not necessarily better, it's just another source. So Manatech has chosen anchovies, which are actually small. They're very environmentally, it's sustainable. And another thing, when we look at healthy fats, at supplementing omega, is taking into consideration how pure that omega is. So because fish are such a good source, it's important to make sure, because our oceans are full of heavy metals, it's important to go make sure that that process is clean, that the oil is clean as much as possible. A very deep process of cleaning that oil is called molecular distillation. So another thing to consider is that what's important for us in our diet is the balance between the omega-3 and the omega-6. In our modern diet, again, through a lot of processing and a lot that has happened in our diet, we're getting a lot of 6 and not enough 3. As example, for those of you that eat meat, if a cow is grain-fed, it will be omega-6, but if it's grass-fed, it will be omega-3. Same thing with fish. If they're farmed, it will be omega-6. If they're ocean wild caught, it's omega-3. So all of this to consider. There's a lot to consider when it comes to our health, isn't it? But Manatechs make it easy for us, because the omega-3 supplement, remember, omega is really good friend, helps the plus do its work. So they're really good to be taken together. Manatech's omega-3 is molecular distilled twice. So it's as pure as it can be. It has very high levels of EPA and DHA, which are actually in the form that our body is going to use. And it's good to remember that omega is not only important for our hormonal system, it's also important for our brain, for our joints, for our heart, for our mood. So, and great news, it doesn't have that fishy reflex that you sometimes get with other products. And as I mentioned, it's sustainable. So it's a really good choice to go for the omega-3. And as a bonus, it comes with D3. A lot of Australians, even though we have lots of sun, turns out that are depleted in D3. Some say it's because since we protect our sun so much with sunscreen, we don't have that exposure to the sun, and it's hard for us to produce the vitamin D just from the sun. So having it as a supplement is a good way to go. I want to mention a couple of products while we're talking about phytosterols, and one of the major ingredients in the plus is an ingredient called Dioscorea villosa, which is made out of a very specific source of wild yam. Now, if you look at the labels of Bounce Back and of Sport, you will see that that ingredient is there as well. So I just wanted to make the distinction between these three products. Plus is designed to help the body, the way it's formulated. So one of the major ingredients are the Dioscorea villosa, but it's not the only ingredient. What that means is that the other ingredients that have been put together with the Dioscorea villosa in the plus are there to help the body make hormones. The Dioscorea villosa in the bounce back with the other ingredients that have been put in the bounce back are there specific to help the body deal with inflammation. And when it comes to sport, again, the other ingredients that are there to help the body to deal with inflammation, recovery, and musculoskeletal issues. So that's the distinction, and that's where it ties into the hormonal. Even though it supports the hormonal balance, it just does it in a bit of a different way, and that's why the utilization of it is a little bit different, more specific. Now, we can't go any further. We've talked about our bodies and our hormones need the macronutrients that we eat with our food and the micronutrients. We've mentioned the phytosterols, we mentioned omega. We need to mention just there's 4 other groups. We're just going to go through them briefly because there's other talks that today was a lot about hormones. So we just have to tie it in to the hormones, but we're not going to focus it as much because we've got other talks that do the work and focus on these other groups of nutrients. So I just want to go quickly. The most probably important next group and is the glycans. And obviously it's later down the list just because today the focus was about hormones. It's not at the bottom of the list by no stretch of the imagination. The glycans are in charge of our absorption and assimilation. They're in charge also of how the hormonal system will communicate with the rest of the body. So one of the analogies that I really like is, remember those days we had phones with cords in them before we had our mobile phones and our wireless one, when there were still wires in our phones. So if you think about it, the phone, the message is the hormones, but the cable, how it goes and gets transmitted to the rest of the body is where the glycans come into play. So the way the glycans, and in fact, there's lots of glycans that are actual hormones. There's lots of hormones that are glycans. So part of the functions are absorption and assimilation, regulations of the cells, cleansing the cells, support, getting our cells tight and held together, and identifying whether a cell is a foreigner and needs to be annihilated or is a friend and needs support. All of these functions and more, even things like how the sperm recognizes the egg with issues of fertility or anything like that, is all has to do with those glycans. Now, in 2012, the National Academy of Science published a big study called Transforming Glycoscience, a Roadmap for the Future, which was all around glycans. That's how important this area of science is. And the big sentence that had to do with humans is that every disease that affects humans significantly involves glycans. So that's why glycans are so important in our health. They're important for our immune system. They're important for our brain function. They're important for our endocrine system because that's how the endocrine gets to send its message. They're also important for mood, irritability, the communication. So that's why we cannot leave a talk of hormones without mentioning glycans. The next one that is really important to mention, important for our hormones and important for our immune system, is probiotics, our gut function. Now, we can talk for an hour about how important gut function is, but really quickly, gut function is important for, they're now finding the connection between gut function and brain function, gut function and mood, gut function and assimilation, gut function and immune system. 80% of our immune system resides within our gut. Gut function and inflammation. So there's lots of areas that our gut function is important. Therefore, and a lot of some of our hormones are actually made in our gut. So making sure that we take care of our gut is super important. And that's where our GI Pro balance comes into the picture. And it covers all these criteria of being really effective in various levels of pH of the goo, of the body, of the digestion. And you don't even have to refrigerate it. We have full talks just to go into a gut function and the role that GI Pro balance plays. So these are really important ones. The last one that I will mention is the catalyst, our multivitamin catalyst, because as much as you want to create hormones and you want them to communicate, we now need to feed those cells. And our vitamins and minerals are like the food of the cell. So glycans are like the brain of the cell. Our phytosterols are the messages, the messaging, the post office of our cells. The GI Pro helps the absorption, and the catalyst is the food to nourish our tissues, nourish our bones. So, you know, back to talking about our bone density, bone health, and guys, please don't switch off when we talk about bone health, because men, everything that I mentioned in the hormonal cascade, with the depletion of the progesterone for women, with men, it's the depletion of testosterone that causes all of it. And a lot of men, more and more men are starting to have issues with the bone density and with hormonal issues. A lot of men are being put on different forms of hormonal treatment to deal with the issues that they're dealing with as they grow older. So don't close your ears. It's not just a female talk today. So yeah, that brings us to our phytosterols, talking about hormonal health. I should have brought you the book. I'll finish with this. Many of you that have been long enough would have met a scientist, a doctor by the name of Dr. Gil Cates, and he certainly has delivered talks on Sharon's Call. And some of us have had the privilege to meet him when we went to our conferences in Dallas. And for over 30 years, this gentleman, he's an independent scientist. That what he has a lab that evaluates the efficacy of various supplements. So every company that produces supplements will go to him, to his company, and said, hey, we've developed this supplement and we think that it does such and such. Can you test it for us and give us an unbiased opinion? And for decades now, Dr. Gil Cates, who has spoken, even though he's independent, he has spoken on the Magnetic stage in Dallas many times. When he comes back to the other companies, he said, look, I'm sorry, your supplement, he says, more often than not, he has to go back to the company and say, I'm sorry, but more often than not, your supplement doesn't really do what you thought, what you think it does. But Manatech was one of the first companies that already in the early days gave Dr. Cates our products, our Plus initially, and then Ambritose to test. And he was blown away because it did way beyond what was written that it's supposed to do. So he was really intrigued. And for over 14 years, up to today actually, but at the 14-year mark, for 14 years, he has been following people like myself and some of you that are on the call that have been taking the Manatech supplements over time. And he used two things to test the level of health of the people that came to have the test of us. One was various blood tests. And the other one is a DEXA scan. So DEXA scan, for those of you that are not sure, it's like this big bed that you lie on. And what it does, it just measures, it scans your body for body composition, and it can tell you the bone density, how much of your body is bone, how much of your body is fat, how much of your body is muscle, like that. And it can do it on the different parts of the body. So that's just so after 14 years of Dr. Cates doing these studies, over 8,000 studies, over 8,000 subjects, he came out with a book. He wrote a book, and part of where he really reported his studies, one of the things that he mentioned in that book that I wanted to share with you, because we talked about bone density, he had this chart about bone density. So, you know that they expected as people age, especially women, they're told, oh, your bone density is just going to decline, which in our ancestors was actually not like that. Your bones could get stronger. It's really a self-inflicted thing with diet and lifestyle that our bones have become, the density has gone down, but it doesn't have to be this way. So Dr. Cates took various groups, and the various group did other things. They took other dietary supplements. We had a placebo study. We had a group that went to the gym and did resistance exercises, which like your gold standard to deal with bone density. And then there was the group that took the Manatech supplements. And you can see that their increase in bone density was 3.5 times than going to the gym. Those that know me, I'm not going to tell you not to go to the gym. Exercise is at the top of the list. So we take, everything. We take the supplements, we do our exercises, and we eat well, right? So we can stack the deck in our favor. It's not just one-sided. But I wanted to show you that to give you, some of you have the book, some of you have heard Dr. Cates. There's a whole talk with Sharon that Dr. Cates goes through his study with other criteria that he shares. But I wanted to just share the bone density because we've already covered it on the talk. So hopefully we've made it in time, just a minute to 9. I hope you got something out of this talk. I know that there is a lot of information, but the good news is that I know that Sharon records those talks and very diligently uploads them. So if you want to hear it again, and thanks to Gary, because he edits them before they get uploaded so neatly and nice. So I hope you got something out of this talk. Many of you have heard it before, so either got re-inspired, reminded. Yeah. Over to you, Sharon.
Mandakini, I'm just in awe of your knowledge and presentation style. It's just so amazing. And God bless you for all your knowledge today. You should, I'm going to download the chat and send it to you because it's pretty amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share, and have a great weekend, guys. You're all doing an amazing job sharing our message.